Welcome to the Imperial Truth. I'm your host, Eric, and today we are just going to go over the Horus Heresy FAQ that dropped on the 30th of October. There were a few things in here that are going to affect Mechanicum. We'll talk at the end about some of the things I feel like we need FAQs on that we still have not gotten FAQs on. But yeah, it's not a huge amount of information, but there are some implications, and I think that it's worth having a conversation about some of the rules as written versus rules as interpreted or as intended ideas that are coming through, because it seems I've made a joke a few times that we kind of got the half-baked draft Liber. But no, it seems like this is exactly the way they want our army to work, which is odd. If it sounds like I'm a little disappointed, I was really hoping that we would get something. If you're not familiar with this, there have been two FAQs. There was a sort of a day one FAQ or FAQ very early in third edition, and we got nothing. There were no Mechanicum rules changes or adjustments or anything. And so this is now two FAQs that we've had where we have had exactly one Liber Mechanicum rule changed. So in two FAQs, we've gotten one unit adjusted, and not even a popular unit at that. And then in addition, we've gotten some other sort of around the edges things that we'll talk about. So let's get in here and let's talk about this. So the first one is, can an army that has a primary detachment that includes units with a variant of the Mechanicum faction trait include allied detachments that also include units with the variant of the Mechanicum faction trait? And I'll read the rule from the rule book in a moment, from the core rule book, because this is a good question. This is a very important question, because this faction idea, when it comes to Mechanicum, is very sort of nebulous and not well defined, even in the rules. So the answer is yes, with an asterisk. And the designer's note here says, as per the rules for allied detachments, such a detachment would not be able to include any units with the same Mechanicum faction trait as included in the primary detachment. For example, if the primary detachment included units with the Reductor, Cybernetica, and Automata faction traits, an allied detachment in the same army could not include any units with any of these faction traits, but could include units with the Myrmidax, Macrotech, Malagra, and Archimandrite faction traits. So they're just saying that each Mechanicum faction, Cybernetica, Macrotech, Reductor, all of those, they are as distinct and independent as Blood Angels are from not Luna Wolves, Sons of Horus, or Salamanders are from Solar Auxilia. That's a thing, and to be fair, this is somewhat confirmed by the core rules, although there's a little bit of a wiggle room and distinction here, because I think that in the rules they are distinguishing between a faction and a faction trait, but are not defining necessarily what a faction is. And again, I'll make the point in a moment. So bear with me on this. So here are my initial thoughts. This all but confirms that the variants of the Mechanicum faction trait are independent factions, which is exactly what I just said. Reductor and Macrotech are distinct factions. They cannot mix. They cannot be in the same detachment. They can't exist together. The Reductor units cannot go into Macrotech transports. This is unfortunate for us, because we have this Macrotech detachment that is actually very good, that locks our Triaris armored conveyor units into Macrotech, which then means that they basically can't transport anything, which is problematic because one of the rules that they get, one of the special rules, is that their transport capacity goes up by 2. So we get an additional transport capacity, but we can't put anything in it. It's even a bigger deal for like the macro card something transporter. It's one of the Legends units. It's locked to Macrotech, so you could just never put a reductor unit in there. That's pretty cut and dry at this point. I don't see, you can't really argue that it's oh well, they intended it to be different. They explicitly called out in the designer's note that they are distinct in different factions, and just like you couldn't put a Blood Angel unit into an Imperial Fist Rhino, you cannot put a reductor unit into a Macrotech tech transport. That sucks. I've seen some discussion online on various forums that we can mix detachments. Like you could put tech thralls in the same detachment as Thalax. That is that. I mean, for one, the Liber Mechanicum book explicitly says you cannot. But this sort of puts the nail in the coffin into that argument. Even you cannot mix these faction traits. They are immiscible, to use a scientific term. This is an interesting but not unexpected outcome. This is what I've been arguing for since third edition happened. This is the way it's intended. It is written the way it's intended. There are several places in the rulebook where in the Liber Mechanicum and in the core rulebook that these things are laid out. If you're interested, the Mechanicum is Broken video, if you've not watched that one already, we go through this and we discuss this, and I make the argument that it's pretty, yeah. The only thing I have a problem with here, I mean, aside from the Macrotech detachment that just now doesn't work well, is that this actually seems to be in disagreement with rules on page 279 of the Age of Darkness rulebook. So I'm just going to read this here verbatim and we can talk about it. It says under faction on page 279. So if you're looking at the pages to the bottom left area, it says an army's faction is determined by the army list for the primary detachment. For example, an army whose primary detachment is selected from the Legiones Astartes army list and uses Blood Angels Legion rules would have the faction Blood Angels, while an army whose primary faction is selected from the Mechanicum army list would have the faction Mechanicum. An army's faction will determine whether certain units can be included as part of it and may be referenced by other rules as and with allegiance faction is often represented by a trait. However, simply being in a detachment that has a certain faction does not grant that trait. It must be either on the unit's profile or granted by another special rule. And so what this means is that faction trait automatically confers faction, right? The way that that's phrased is if you have the faction trait, that's your faction. But it doesn't always convey it. There are other ways to get it. The problem with this is that line where it says that while an army whose primary detachment is selected from the Mechanicum army list would have the faction Mechanicum. All right, so let's quick timeout, pause. We're going to go to the Liber Mechanicum book, okay? And the problem is that on page, I'm going to pull it up. So we have good rules here. I went too far. It's page 13, I think. I can find page 13. There you go. It's on page 12. So this is page 12 of the Mechanicum Taghmata our book, the Mechanicum Liber. Here's the deal. There is no reference to a Mechanicum army list here. Everything is Mechanicum Taghmata Army List. So down at the bottom left on page 12 under Mechanicum at War, building a Mechanicum Taghmata Army, it says every unit from the Mechanicum Taghmata Army List will have an allegiance, everywhere where it references it, it's very consistently the Mechanicum Taghmata Army List. So there is no Mechanicum army. There's no Mechanicum faction. There's a Mechanicum Taghmata Army List, which then does not have a faction of Mechanicum Taghmata Army List, right? There's no Mechanicum Taghmata faction, I guess is what I'm saying. It's hopefully you can see that it's still written weirdly, mainly because that rule on page 279, there's another one that I don't remember the page for, but there's another Mechanicum reference where they talk about the Mechanicum faction in the Age of Darkness rulebook, where it's just weird. It's just a weird sort of middle ground where it's just, yeah, it would be nice to have an FAQ where they kind of explicitly lay out what the what it means to have a faction, and what the difference between like an army list and a faction are. I mean, I think I understand it, but the problem is that it then gets contradicted by this quote on page 279. The question I have, and if you want to leave a comment in the discussion below to talk about it, is, are allied units still considered to be part of the Mechanicum Taghmata Army List? So I think that they are. I think the way that I've read the allied stuff, there is nothing in the allied stuff that says that you aren't considered to be part of that army. You're just not part of that faction. So if you are, let's say I build a list and then I put a reductor Magos and a reductor unit in my allied slot, so to get a couple more places in there, do they still count as part of the Mechanicum Taghmata Army List? Would they still get the high techno arcana that there is, because that is linked to the Mechanicum Taghmata Army List? I think that they would, but let me know. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. Okay, so one more thought in all of this before we move on to the next one. And you can see that this is kind of a big deal for us. You should definitely abuse the hell out of allies now. You just should. Bringing an allied detachment for Mechanicum is the way that it's designed. If we go back one slide and we read the designer's note, it literally calls it out that this is the way it's designed. So I would, if I were you, I would almost always include one detachment of the Mechanicum Taghmata stuff. And here's why. If you include the Mechanicum detachment, you get an extra prime slot on your command, and you get an extra prime slot on a troops choice. So that means you could bring 2 tech priests, and both of them could have combat veterans, which we're going to find out in a minute is more important than ever. You could bring 2 Magos, one in each group. And each Magos could be a prime slot, so you could make them both combat veterans, or use both for logistical benefit, or whatever you want to do. Yeah, it's so long as you manage those faction terms and keep them separate, you can totally do this. And there's no rule. There's no rule saying you can't. There are rules now saying that you can. So definitely do that. Always bring a Mechanicum allied detachment. It's weird, but I guess sure, that's just the way the army is meant to play. And don't feel bad about it, because we still don't get an extra reaction point for whatever reason. All right. So the other sort of shadow one we got was, when I say shadow FAQ, it's because they're in the core rulebook FAQ and not the mechanical one, but they are obviously designed specifically for Mechanicum. And this is one I was wrong on. I will admit it. I read it the other way. I read it as rules as written, but they have clarified this. So under the automata type, we're going to add the following to the end of the first bullet point. However, if a unit that contains any models with the automata type also includes any models that do not have the automata type, so if we put a Magos with a unit of automata, that check must be made with the characteristics of one of the models that does not have the automata type and is not automatically passed. All right, so what this means is that previously, the way some of us, including myself, were reading this is that automata always count as passing tactical status checks. So they never fail. So they would never, even if you had a Magos in the unit, you would never have to check because they always pass. And under the Mechanicum book, when it talks about Amigos being added to a unit, it specifically says that they can be routed in combat. But that's it. That's the only one that's called out. So it seemed like they were saying, okay, well, you can be routed, but you can't ever get panicked from a flamer weapon or suppressed or anything like that. And this is clarifying that that is not the case. You actually do make those checks, and you specifically have to make the check off of the Magos or Archmagos or Tech Priest or whoever's attached to the unit. And this is a little bit of a problem. It's a little bit frustrating because the Automata have a cool of 12 and Amigos, I think, has a cool of like 10, which is not bad. It's not terrible, but I would rather have a cool of 12, be able to take it off the Automata numbers. So it's fine. It's not great. It makes Automata less useful for holding objectives, but it makes them maybe more useful for just gumming up things. Suddenly you don't want to necessarily put your Magos with a unit of Automata because they're going to make that unit subjected to checks. So I don't know. I don't know where I'm at with this. Again, if you have thoughts, leave them in the comments below and talk about it. But let's go over some discussions. I think it's a big deal. I think it's understandable, but I think it's a big deal. It really changes the calculus for when we are going to bring our units to the battlefield. So yeah, the nuncio boxes are still very useful, I think. Oh, sorry, are now very useful. I kind of poo-pooed them before because there was no reason to bring them because you're never going to take a status effect because that's the way automata were written. But now, if you're going to put a unit with a Magos or an Archmagos or a Tech Priest with an automata unit, you definitely want the nuncio box now. So I guess we're putting those in all of our units. Combat veterans is going to be really useful in this. I think that you will always want to make your Tech Priest a combat veteran. Their leadership and cool 8. Combat veteran gets them to leadership in cool 9, which is way better mathematically. Again, if you want to jump back to the one of the Science of Slaughters, we talked about that. But I have a question now. Again, like all this half-baked stuff. So there's a ruling in the FAQ about if you have, let's say, a unit of tactical Marines and there's a Centurion in them and they are pinned and the Centurion pops off the unit. So you go from 1 unit to 2 units. Is the Centurion still pinned? And the answer is yes. And the opposite is true. So if you have a unit of tactical Marines that are suppressed and the Centurion that is not suppressed enters the unit, does the Centurion become suppressed? And the answer is yes. So here's my question. If I have a Tech Priest and that Tech Priest is suppressed and that Tech Priest is part of a unit of Castellax who cannot be suppressed, if the Tech Priests leave the unit, do the automata get the tactical status? Because according to the rules, they cannot ever have tactical statuses. So it seems like they can't. But also from this ruling and the other rulings about removing and adding units, it does seem maybe like a loophole where they could have the tactical status because that's the way the design note is written. Yeah, it's again, it would be nice to have that clarified. I wouldn't play it that way. I honestly probably just wouldn't remove the Tech Priest from the unit because it just would be kind of complicated. But yeah, obviously the tactical status is on the Tech Priest and not the automata. So why would they continue to have that status? All right. The next one is, can units with the Malefic subtype gain the disgraced status or a cyberthurgic status? And the answer is yes, they can, which is fine. I'm not sure what the overall thing is here. It's probably maybe an Astartes thing. But yeah, it's so we can put cyberthurgic statuses on Malefic units. So we could put it on I think Galvorback art, which is an Astartes unit, are Malefic. We could put it on Demons of the Ruin Storm. So that's interesting. we can definitely use those in that case. I don't usually play Trader Mechanicum, but if you do, if you like the Dark Mechanicum stuff, that opens up a whole new door for you in terms of that stuff. The actual only real FAQ that we got directly was this one. And basically, I won't go through all of the wording, but it's our Arcator Magisterium. That's our assassin type model that goes around and enforces the Mechanicum rules and is part of the Malagra faction. They can now take weapons, which is good because they could not previously take them. I don't know. I'll check while we're on here. One of the problems was that the model comes with the resin model from Forge World comes with a Paragon blade, and they cannot have a Paragon blade currently. So it says we may have one item from the Mechanicum melee weapons list or the Mechanicum Magos list, and we're going to change it to Mechanicum pistols Magos. Okay, so the Magos list is Mechanicum Magos weapons is a Paragon blade. So we now can take a Paragon blade on this model, which is cool. It's a fun model. It's very melee centric Mechanicum, which is not a usual thing. They do have a little bit of a problem that they will debuff your own units nearby. But yeah, it's fine. It's a fine adjustment. It's necessary. I would like to have seen a lot more than just this one Forge World model getting FAQ'd, but sure. With that said, let's talk about this and the things that I still think need FAQ'd. And please remember that FAQs are not always about erratas. They are sometimes about clarifying things so that there's no ambiguity in the rules. So while you may look at something like this and be like, listen, Eric, it's obvious that this is the way it's written, that's fine, but it would still be nice to have a ruling saying that it is. So these are the ones that I think still need to be resolved, aside from the ones that we've already talked about. And if you have any others that you think should be added, put them in the comments. We can have a discussion about it. And if you put something really interesting down there, we'll maybe make a video about it. All right, so should the Mechanicum Taghmata Army List get an extra reaction point? Literally every other thing that has been released, every other Legends group, every other faction that's out there, they all get an extra reaction point for bringing essentially a high command model. And we don't. There's no rule in our book that says that it's the case. And I've mentioned before that I've been in games and had people be like, no, let me see your book. It definitely says it somewhere. And they'll open it up and they'll look around and it's just not there. So it does seem like it's an oversight for us. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's the way it's written, but it would be nice to know. Here's another one. Are the variants of the Mechanicum faction true factions, especially for transports? I would like it explicitly said. I know it's more or less explicitly said in different places, but I would like them to say that Reductor to Macrotech is just like Blood Angels to Iron Hands, for example, that they are just as distinct. That'd be nice. It'd be nice to have that clarification, especially for the transports, and maybe to have some sort of FAQ about our transports that allows our transports to actually put people in them. That would be nice. How does Comptroller interact with Vanguard or support? So you guys have called me out on this in the comments, and that's fine. I'm going to do a video where we do a bunch of clarifications. I can see the point. I still disagree with you, but I can see the point, and I would play it. I will always, my personal thing is I will always play the rule so that it disfavors me. So if I'm worried about a ruling, I will always go with whatever is less beneficial to me because I don't want to game things in that direction. So the argument here is that Comptroller says that you add a number equal to the X to the points that you are scoring when you score an objective. The problem is that Vanguard and support both essentially say you are limited to this number of points. So Vanguard is you're limited to 1 point, support is you're limited to the X. So if you had to support one unit, score an objective that was 3 points, you would only score 1 point. However, if you had a Comptroller with that support unit, would you score 1 point plus, let's say it's comptroller 2, 1 point plus the 2 for comptroller, or do you score the comptroller points and it gets reset to 1 because of the way that support works? And I can see it both ways. It would be nice to have that sort of clarified and called out somewhere so that we could know. As far as I know, we are one of the only, we are more or less the only faction that has a comptroller style rule. There is a Black Shields, the Black Shields Automata version adds additional ones too. So that would probably also be nice to clarify. What is the correct timing for the Omega Protocol cyberthergic power? I'm going to die on this hill. I'm sure you guys are tired of me saying this. It just doesn't work. I mean, it does work. There's like a very narrow window and a very narrow set of circumstances that allow it to go off. But the problem is that you have to use Omega protocols before the person invoking Omega protocols makes a charge. And so you have to have a situation where your tech thralls charge into a unit, successfully make that charge, and then your tech priest or your magos, whoever's using the cyberthergic power, also has to be within 12 inches of the unit that's just charged, and has to be within charging distance of another of an enemy unit so that they can make a charge, because you have to do it when you're selected to charge. And so it's the most cumbersome of all the cyberthergic powers, and it seems like it would just be an easier thing to do to say that you invoke cyberthergic powers in the assault phase after you make your charges. That would be fine. If you made that fix, it would work fine. The other one, the last one that I think needs an FAQ, and this is just an English thing, and it's probably American English versus British English. And if you are a British English speaker, let me know what I'm getting wrong here. But Ages of Pain, I'll pull it up because this is a little bit of a thing for me. So it says all models in a unit composed entirely of models with this special rule and the reductor trait gain the Fear 1 special rule while any models right? The way I read that, right, is that you need this special rule, Ages of Pain, and the reductor trait as well. The problem is that all the models that we have that have Ages of Pain have the reductor trait, so they automatically do that. But any Magos that has the reductor trait wouldn't have that, right? If I were writing this to be like, we can have Thalax and a Magos that has reductor, and that's fine, I would say, or, right, this special rule or the reductor trait. Yeah, and that's just, like I said, that might just be an English thing, and I'm misunderstanding that. But like, you know, if I went to the store and I said I want to pick up bananas and apples, right, I would get both, not one or the other, right? If I went to the store and I said I want to get bananas or apples, I would get one or the other, right? So that's sort of where I'm at with that. It's basically the way it's written now is if you put a Magos unit with a unit of Thalax, they will lose Aegis of Pain, which sucks because in order to get the reductor faction rule, they have to have a Magos or Archmagos or whatever with them to get that rule. So it's, yeah, anyway, it's not, again, not a huge deal. The Lacrimata, the Omega Protocols thing is not a huge deal. None of these are game breaking. It just would be nice to have them. So, you know, I know we're up to a whopping, you know, a couple hundred subscribers, and I really appreciate that. So obviously Games Workshop is now watching these videos, so they can go through and put all these in the next FAQ. But yeah, if you have anything that you think should have been in the FAQ, or if you think I got anything wrong, or if you just have thoughts and feelings about this stuff, please leave a comment below. As always, if you liked this video, just leave a like, maybe share it with somebody that you think would also enjoy it. Subscribe if you've not. Yeah, say a prayer to the Omnissiah that we will eventually get all of the FAQ stuff that we need. And otherwise, have a great day. Catch you in the next video.